Welcome everybody to our session today. We're just going to give it one more minute and give time for some folks to join us, and we'll get started. All right. Welcome everyone to our session today on imposter thoughts. We're looking forward to a great conversation about this topic. Next slide. This webinar is being hosted by the National Coordinating Center of the Resource Centers for Minority Aging Research at UCLA. With funding from the NIA, the Coordinating Center at UCLA works with RCMAR sites to disseminate resources and tools that support early career researchers focused on improving the health and well-being of diverse older adults in the United States. As a land-grant institution, UCLA and the RCMAR Coordinating Center acknowledges our presence on the traditional ancestral territory of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples. We hope you can take a minute to acknowledge the ancestral lands that you are currently on. The staff at the Coordinating Center work very hard to provide you with updated information about opportunities and resources related to aging research in diverse communities. So we invite you to visit our website for updates and announcements and to follow us on social media. Next slide. Just a few reminders before we begin today. Please note that we are using Zoom webinar for today's session. This means that we can't hear or see you participants, so please take the time to introduce yourselves to our speakers and each other using the chat function. Go ahead and enter your name and institutional affiliation and let our speakers know who's in the audience. Also, please go ahead and post your questions for the presenters as we go using the Q&A button, or post your comments throughout the chat. At the end of the presentations, you will be able to use the reactions feature to raise your hand to ask questions to our presenters verbally. Lastly, we will be distributing today's slides to registered participants and posting the session on our website. Next slide. It is my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today. Our first speaker will be Dr. Ericka Boone. Dr. Boone is the director of the NIH Division of Loan Repayment. In this role, she is responsible for administering and providing leadership for the NIH Loan Repayments Program, as well as representing NIH on matters related to operations, development, and evaluation of the LRPs. And Dr. Boone gave a presentation on these a couple months ago for our RCMAR audience. So welcome back, Dr. Boone. We'll also hear from Dr. Roland Thorpe. Dr. Thorpe is a professor in the Department of Health, Behavior, and Society, founding director of the program on men's health research in the Hopkins Center for Health Disparity Solutions, and co-director of the Johns Hopkins Alzheimer's Disease Resource Center for Minority Aging Research. He holds joint appointments in the Division of Geriatric Medicine and Gerontology in the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine and the Department of Neurology. Dr. Thorpe is also the editor-in-chief of Ethnicity and Disease, who we have a special issue with through the RCMAR community. So welcome, Dr. Thorpe. We'll also hear from two of our own RCMAR scientists, Dr. Brandon Brown and Dr. Mirella Diaz-Santos. Dr. Brown is an associate professor in the Department of Social Medicine, Population, and Public Health at UC Riverside School of Medicine, where he is a member of the IRB, an equity advisor, teaches public health and medical ethics, and faculty advisor for medical selectives on LGBT health, global health, and HIV. Dr. Brown leads the Campus Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation program and conducts community-based participatory research on HIV and aging. Dr. Diaz-Santos is an adjunct assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. She is director of research of the Hispanic Neuropsychiatric Center of Excellence at our Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior at UCLA. And she's a research psychologist at the Mary Easton Center for Alzheimer's Disease Research. Dr. Diaz-Santos is currently chair of the Hispanic Neurological Society Mentoring and Education Committee and is an active member of the National Academy of Neuropsychology Culture and Diversity Committee. Welcome again to everyone, and thank you speakers for taking the time to be with us today. Let's get started. Dr. Boone, the floor is yours.
Fantastic. I will share my screen. Can you all see that? Okay, fantastic. So thank you all for having me here today. And as if on cue, Brownie, my dog, is at my feet whining because he wants my attention because I'm on a call instead of paying attention to him. So as I've learned to start my talks off with, if you hear whining, barking, begging, snoring, it's not me, it is the dog. I am fully engaged with you all this morning. Just please ignore the home things. We're now broadcasting from our homes. But I'm so happy to be here with you all today to share my thoughts and experiences on imposter fears. Okay, go to the next slide. Alrighty, so this is our brief agenda. So welcome, that's our welcome. Introduction, you all heard who I was. So we're gonna talk a little bit about imposter fears, why I call it a monster, why it can impact career development, career progression, and we'll end by talking about how we can kind of help to vanquish that monster. So there are some important notes is that we're talking about imposter fears and imposter thoughts. And while most presentations, publications, so on and so forth, focus on the individual and individual level ways that we can kind of tackle our imposter thoughts and imposter fears, this presentation is definitely not about fixing you. So we will talk a little bit about how institutions can be helpful in this in the end, but really my whole goal for development of this presentation and talking with people about this is that I think that recognition is the first step, right? And even when we are involved, we have to engage in our environments, right? So the only way that we can do that is if we're undergirding ourselves and supporting ourselves. So that's one of the important goals for me with these presentations. So I'm hoping that we can be transparent because I totally am. Sometimes I'm a little bit too much transparent, and we can be interactive and we can have transparent and interactive conversations and also kind of take time to reflect on our own personal experiences so that we can help to refocus and reframe our thoughts and also empower ourselves when we're in situations where we are feeling less empowered. So what are imposter fears and imposter thoughts, and what do they typically feel like when we're going through them? So basically, it's a pattern of thought where we're discounting our accomplishments. We have a persistent fear of failing or not measuring up or being exposed as a fraud. And we behave in those ways too. I remember with my first interview here at NIH, I have a background in behavioral pharmacology. My background is in addiction research. And I was interviewing for a position in a policy office at the National Institute on Drug Abuse. Went through 2 days of interviews, so on and so forth. And in the end, I talked to the person who was going to end up being my supervisor. And I tell her in a very sheepish way, you know, I don't know anything about science policy, right? Because I didn't want to get this job and be in a position where I'm going to be exposed as not knowing as much as what I probably should or as much as what other people do. And she leaned in and she said to me in the same way that I was whispering to her, I know, I read your CV. However, you have all of the other background and knowledge that we need. We can't teach people about the science of addiction, but we can teach you about policy. And things ended up okay. But I think that that was one of the biggest revelations to me, that I was allowing for these imposter fears and these imposter thoughts to not only invade my thought, but also impact what I'm reaching out for, my goals and my dreams. So imposter thoughts and imposter fears are all can be us utilizing this outer mask of perfection, right? But we have these inner feelings of doubt and fear of failure. So it's kind of like we get dressed every day, we go out, we have our Superman outfit on, but inside we're probably not feeling as confident. It's described as having these inner feelings of anxiety. We engage in a lot of negative self-doubt and we dwell on past mistakes. We're people on this call that are very high achieving people. We hold ourselves to really high standards. And sometimes when we don't measure up to that, we can talk pretty negatively to ourselves. We don't talk to ourselves like we're our own best friend. Sometimes we can wake up in the middle of the night thinking about mistakes that we've made, or thinking about, man, I wish I had said this, or I wish I had done that in that particular conversation or in that particular circumstance. Sometimes we chalk up our accomplishments due to luck or others' contributions. So for example, the first thing you say when someone says to you, hey, that was really great what you just did, or blah, blah, blah. And we'll say, well, I just had a lot of help from other people. Or if it wasn't for so-and-so, I'm not really sure of what I would be able to do, right? So how do we counteract that? Is that we try to be perfectionists in everything. We over prepare for everything because we don't want to be in a situation or circumstance where we don't know the answer, because in our minds, we feel like there's no room for error for us. So as I said before, it's experienced by highly successful, intelligent people like us. So we're not slackers, but it can also be sparked. I'm sorry. I have not advanced my slides. I thought that those were advanced. I was having a technical difficulty here. It can often be sparked by new opportunities or transitions. Like, for example, I'm telling you about that job interview that I went on, where I'm thinking to myself, gosh, am I going to really be able to measure up, right? I guess I should have turned off Teams, because here are my team members IMing. The worst thing about imposter syndrome is that no one ever admits it. So you always feel like you're by yourself. So you carry these imposters thoughts and imposter fears around on your own shoulders, but you're hiding it from other people. And the more bouts and more often we experience these imposter thoughts and imposter fears, it can impact our personal and professional development. So these are common thoughts that we experience when we're going through these bouts of imposter fears, is that this is what people know or are qualified to do, and then this is us. Things that we beat ourselves up over, stuff that's always out of our control, stuff that everyone else has already forgotten about, or things, my favorite, is that things that no one else has even noticed. It's kind of like when you were a kid and you were on stage and you messed up from the 6th grade play and you say, oh, no one even paid any attention until you made that face, until you pointed it out yourself. But we carry these things around for us. And this is my favorite. All these people really seem to have it all together, and I seem to have no idea of what's going on. So really what we tend to think is that other people have these Superman mentalities. We think about them as having these Superman mentalities, but we feel as if we are being held together by tape and popsicle sticks and glue. I'm going to have to tell my teammates to stop IMing me right now. They know I'm on the call. And then this is the last one. What if they find out that I'm an imposter? That's the last thing that we want to happen, right? So who experiences imposter thoughts and feelings? So 2 out of 3 people. So you're definitely not by yourself. Also, more females will admit to experiencing imposter thoughts than men. Females also will attribute success to talent and grit and failure. I'm sorry, men will attribute success to talent and grit and failure to bad circumstance. And women oftentimes will report internalizing it, and that their successes are due to luck or help to somebody else. And if there's some failure involved, or their perception that they failed in some sort of way, that it's due to some sort of personal ineptitude, or they didn't try as hard as what they should have. As I said before, it's experienced by really high achieving people. We're in fields where we're considered to be the experts. How much pressure is that, to be considered an expert in whatever it is? My mom, bless her heart, thinks that I'm an expert in everything. She asks me all kinds of questions. It doesn't matter what it is, except for what I'm actually an expert in, right? She never asks me about stuff that I really know. So I'll tell her all the time, Mom, that's not my field of study. I'm not an expert in that. She just looks at me and says, well, you know someone who is, so go ask them and come back and tell me the answer. That's pretty true. But being, the family expert or the expert in your department or an expert in a particular area, that's a lot of pressure. And we really internalize that. So there's where there's no room for error, because if we don't know, we should have known. There's also that tension between the perfectionist versus the natural genius, right? So I've always said about myself, I just try really hard, but so-and-so is super smart. They're so very smart and they always know the answer to things, right? So what are some of the reinforcers of imposter feelings? Really, these thoughts of imposter feelings are really rooted in our perceived differences between ourselves and the things and the people that we see in our environment. And then there are also people who love to make us feel like we are different, right? Like we are an outsider. Hold on one second while I text these people and tell them, stop IMing me. All right, hopefully that action will stop. They're being like Brownie the dog. Other reinforcers are our educational experiences. So women remain unrepresented in STEM. As a matter of fact, girls are lost at every educational, or females are lost at every educational transition point on their way to a STEM career. So on average for girls, they gain their interest in STEM by age 11, and then they lose it by 15. That is a short window. Also, Hispanics, African American, American Indian, and Alaska Natives also remain underrepresented. And the roadblocks seem to be so ever persistent. There's a lack of resources, there's a lack of role models, there's a lack of relatability. Oftentimes when you engage a person or an individual in a particular area later, they perceive it as being harder. So there's no chance that they're going to be engaged in that career. I took my first physics class probably in college. I was good at it, but there was no way that I was going to be a physicist. There's no way that I was going to be engaging in that, because I always thought that it was so hard because people always told me that it was hard. Also, we encounter a lot of unconscious bias and a lot of microaggressions that reinforce our feelings of not belonging in specific spaces and places. So this is what every class I ever took looked like. I don't look like any of the people in that. And I think that some people can kind of relate to that. And then television. Media shows us that this is what teachers look like. You guys remember that movie with Hilary Swank? She swooped in and saved all of the kids in the inner city from lives of misfortune. And then also, this is what scientists look like. For those of us on the call that are scientists, if you ask your kids, if you ask your family, if you ask whomever it was, what a scientist look like, they would not say that a scientist look like you. Also, this is what dentists look like. These are what lawyers look like. None of those things particularly look like us. And these are images that are pervasive that we see even now today. Also, our early life experiences and family dynamics can play a role in the experience of imposter thoughts or imposter fears, right? So I spoke with one of my colleagues about his experiences. He happens to be a white male. And in his family, when he grew up, it was brawn versus brains that was really celebrated in his family. And if you were intelligent, that meant you were weak. That meant that, you didn't belong in his family, because we do physical things. Book smarts is one thing, but street smarts is another. I know that a lot of people have probably heard this one before. There's also our work environments, and we are surrounded by people who insist on being uncivil in our working environments. We've all experienced microaggressions, some of us racism, some of us sexism. Some people are exposed to experiencing a questioning of their leadership abilities or their actual contributions within their environment. There can be unchecked abuses of power. There can be a mismatch between our values and our work and in our working environment. There's a constant pressure to produce, especially over this last year. It has been absolutely unrelenting. And then there's that lack of relatability. There's that lack of support. There's a lack of mentorship. There's a lack of sponsorship in many environments and circumstances. Dr. Guerrera, if there are things in the chat or questions in the chat and you'd like to stop me, then feel free to do that, because I'm not monitoring the chat box. The chat box, but it looks like there's a lot of activity in there.
Yep, I got it.
What, to me, in my mind, this can translate into is that we're often left feeling like we're unseen, unheard, undervalued in our spaces where we're supposed to be expected to be thriving, not just surviving. So as President Obama once said, you can't be what you don't see, right? From early childhood, even into our adulthood, we're often one of in our spaces. I like to call us unicorns because we're very rarely seen, right? Very rarely experienced. And when no one looks like you, sometimes it feels like there's not space for us. Sometimes we're told there's not any space for us, because it can be hard to be in those spaces where you feel like you don't belong or you're unwelcome. I remember being in grad school and realizing that there are study groups going on that I didn't know anything about. Those meetings before the meetings, those classes before the class. And there is one particular class that we're taking. I think it was biochem. And of course, I was a biology and chem major in undergrad and, go to Penn State. And we take our first test and I got an A and other people got a C or worse. And they're like, oh, well, would you like to be in our study group? No, I don't want to be in your study group, dummy. I did okay by myself. You're the one who needs my help, right? But it was that thing that for some reason I wasn't welcome until I proved myself when other people got that shot automatically, right? That really struck me.
Ericka, there is a question in the chat that asks about men and women's experiences of imposter syndrome. So the question is more of a clarifying one. So both genders can experience this. Is it that they just experience it differently, or they express it differently, or they attribute it to different circumstances?
I think you've answered the question in that. So while everyone can experience it in their own way for their own reasons, more often women are more likely to report it, and they're also likely to experience it in different ways for different reasons. So yes, it's all of those things in one, not just that men don't experience it, but in their minds, it could mean something different. It's a person-to-person kind of thing. Thank you for that. But we can also be our own reinforcers of imposter syndrome. However, I'm a great enforcer of my own imposter, and I'm going to stop calling it imposter syndrome because that means something's wrong with you. This is not a medical diagnosis. That's BS, right? But I'm a great reinforcer of my own imposter thoughts and imposter fears. So I want to engage with you for just 1 second and ask you about being your own best friend. Well, maybe your own worst best friend. So have you ever, let's see in the chat feature, this is one of our interactive opportunities here. So in the chat feature, type yes or no if you have ever discounted your accomplishments or chalked up your successes to luck, timing, or help from other people. If it hadn't been for my mama, I'd have never been able to make it through so-and-so. Or thought or told other people, if I can do it, anyone can. That whole Miss America speech, right? Or agonize even in the smallest flaw in your work. Do mistakes keep anybody up at night, or does it wake them up in the middle of the night because they're thinking about it? They're repeating it in their brains. Do they view mistakes or critiques as evidence that they're not quite equipped? Even when it's a completely new situation, you've never seen it before. How in the world are you supposed to know that when you've never even seen it or encountered it before? Do you hold back? This is my favorite. This is what I used to do. Do you ever hold back in meetings or qualify your statements with, this might not quite be right, but I'm not sure if everyone is thinking in the same way, blah, blah, blah. But who's going to listen to you? You've all seen that movie 300. Are you guys going to get behind someone who's like, yeah, let's go get it? Or someone who's like, this might be the right answer, right? Have you ever thought to yourself, I'd apply for X, Y, and Z, but I'm not really ready yet? You guys better not lie on that one, because with the division of loan repayment, the loan repayment program, I've talked to dozens, hundreds of you, and I'll ask, why didn't you apply? Oh, I was afraid. I didn't think I was ready yet, right? It's not brain surgery. You're not operating someone's brain. It's just an application, right? Have you ever thought, wow, that person really seems together and I'm just trying to keep my head above water. I'm still trying to figure out where the bathroom is, right? Have you ever felt like you couldn't make a mistake? Yes, we've all felt that one. Have you ever thought at some point they're going to figure out that I'm in over my head? Yes. Sometimes I think that right now. I've taken on another opportunity at work. I'm acting director for Division of Biomedical Research Workforce now because my supervisor is retiring. And I'm deathly afraid that someone's going to ask me a question about some mechanisms that I don't know. And they're going to say, why is this chicken at office? She obviously doesn't know what blah, blah, blah is. But if I've never done that before, why would I know that, right? So I'm not giving myself any grace. I'm not giving myself any rest. I've got to know everything right now because there's no room for me to make a mistake, right? Anyone can experience moments of professional and personal self-doubt, and it's for different reasons. You're not alone. We've got how many people on this call right now? 76, and probably not because they're like, I've never heard of imposter thoughts before. Let's see what this presentation's all about. It's because you're like, I need to be amongst my tribe. And I also want to check out what kind of resources this woman's going to offer up, whether it's going to be something useful or if she's full of BS, right? This is one note that I want to impart right here, is that imposter thoughts don't equal have to be low self-esteem. I have read so many articles or publications that equate this to self-esteem. I'm not lacking for self-esteem. You're not lacking for self-esteem, right? So having these imposter thoughts doesn't mean you're a person who has that you have low self-esteem. I went to this one mentoring workshop focused on imposter syndrome, maybe like 2.5, 3 years ago. And it was sponsored by, I don't know, DOD or something like that. So it was pairing mentors with mentees. And I'm paired up with this male. He was not a person of color, could or could not have anything to do with his answer to me. And I asked him, have you ever experienced any imposter thoughts? And he was like, no. He was like, but if you have, I'm sure that you ought to know that you can do anything that you put your mind to. And I just thought to myself, is he about to tell me you was smart, you was kind, you was important? You better not say that. And I just thought to myself, that is so demeaning. Why is he here? Because he clearly doesn't understand where I am. He doesn't understand the basis for some of this. And he doesn't understand that he's probably one of the people who are contributing to this in my work environment. Boom, I'll leave that one with you. Okay, doubt doesn't equal ineptitude, and it doesn't mean that we're not smarter than other people, because we are. They didn't just drive down the street and offer you a position, hey, would you like to come to University of X, Y, and Z? Nope, you competed for just like everyone else, right? But I want to take just 1 second and introduce you to someone, because remember a slide ago I told you you're not alone? I want to introduce you to someone. This person was engaged in sessions with a executive coach. If you ever have the opportunity to engage in executive coaching, please, please, please do so, because we spend so much time buzzing around trying to accomplish all of these goals that we lay out, and we never really take the time to think about what we need to do to prepare ourselves to do those. We never take a time to think our big thoughts about our next steps. All we think about is action, but motion doesn't equal progress, right? It doesn't equal success, but in our mind, we're always grinding, right? So the executive coach was like, okay, I need for you to take a step back. What are the things that you need to do to support yourself, blah, blah, blah. We laid out a plan for it. And she says, we're going to start this off by you listing 20 things that you're proud of about yourself, or 20 ways that 20 adjectives to describe yourself. I think I just gave this away because yes, it was me. So I think I got to probably about 5 things. And then I started to run out of positive stuff to say about myself. So I started to ask my mom, I asked my kid, I asked a couple of my trusted staff members, because I didn't want to let the haters in on this one because they weren't going to be genuine about it, right? So they came up with a bunch of stuff that when I looked at it, I was like, is this what you really think about me? Because in your mind, you're just thinking, I'm going from one thing to the next, right? Buzz, buzz, buzz. You're not really thinking about its impact. You're not really thinking about your impact. right? So those were some of the things they said about me. Yes, this is where I introduced, oh, those things, those words, those are about me. This is my glamour shot. I'm very proud of it. Thank you very much. But even with all of my education, my experience, my background, all of those things, even in the face of opposite evidence, I felt like I wasn't doing enough, because from undergrad to undergrad was fine. Undergrad, I went to an HBCU. This is where I really was like, okay, I'm learning how to sprout my wings and fly, learning who you are. And then I got into an environment at Penn State where I was like, oh my God, what planet did I just land on, right? So that butterfly's wings felt like they were getting clipped, steadily, over time. And then I met someone. We started to develop, we grew a family. I'm trying to figure out how to be a parent. I'm trying to figure out how to, finish my degree and then be a postdoc and then be assistant professor and then, work at NIH. And you start wondering, gosh, does any of this stuff matter? Am I doing any of this stuff well? And I always tell people, if you want to feel inadequate, have a kid. And they'll show you what you don't know, right? They're constantly changing, their needs are constantly changing. But in the midst of that, I think someone sent me this quote several months ago. When you're at a stage right now where you recognize that when you're a kid, you were watching your parents grow up. So your kids are watching you grow up. They're watching you grow into being at this point. As well, you're watching yourself grow into it, right? But all you can think of is the stuff that you feel like you're not doing right. So I have a video for this one where I first encountered my imposter thoughts, but it was in 7th grade math class. It was algebra. I still can't do algebra. I still can't do geometry. Great thing that nobody has, threatened to take my life over whether I could solve this algebraic equation or anything like that. But really those imposter thoughts started because I had a teacher who used to really kind of terrorize us. We were like 7th grade. So I think I was like 11 years old in 7th grade. Because we had questions about algebra. And he would tell kids, nobody knows how ignorant you are until you open your mouth. We're 11. We don't know algebra. This is your job to help us teach it, and it's your job to help us encourage it. But we spent a full year in this class being harassed by this grown person. And out of that came, you're not good at math, Ericka. So sit in the back of the room and be quiet, because otherwise someone's going to find out that you don't know something and they're going to embarrass you. And I took that forward with me. So I asked some people that I knew, hey, when did you first encounter imposter thoughts? And many of them said when I started going into other areas where I wasn't considered to really be an expert. So I was trying to be quiet so that people kind of didn't hear, oh, what is this? What do they know about this? Why are they considered to be an expert in this? This is a hole, in their rationale, right? So the person who used to be the chief officer for scientific workforce here at the NIH gave me a great quote. She said that when she first began to foray into fields where it was outside of her immediate training, right? So outside of her immediate wheelhouse. And she gave an example for when she got this award. She had to give this presentation, but because it was in an area that she wasn't necessarily an expert, but she knew a hell of a lot about, she was almost tongue-tied with even trying to practice this, right? Another person that I know who's a training officer here said, oh, when I came to my job, I was the youngest person. I was the only woman. And then I was, one of few Black people. So, I kind of internalized all of my differences as being something that was negative in this environment. And then in another, I told you about this one before, that someone said that in my family, common sense and physical brawn were revered more readily than intellectual pursuits. So I grew up with a lot of people that came from financially well-to-do backgrounds. They weren't talking to people about Harvard, Yale, Princeton, whatever it was. And then when he ended up there, he still felt out of place, even though he earned a spot there. So 30 seconds, more engagement. I'm hoping that we're feeling a little empowered right now to kind of share a little bit about your own imposter story. Where were those times where you were like, is this what I was feeling back then? Was it 7th grade math that kind of helped to kind of like even start to grow and germinate these thoughts that maybe I didn't quite fit in, I wasn't quite up to snuff with other people do? Does anybody remember that time that they first recognized that? Put that in the chat for me. And I'm asking you about this because I want you to connect where you first felt that, right? So that we can kind of build upon that and kind of stamp out, get at the root of it. What did it make you feel like? What was it that you were actually upset or concerned about, right? And what are you still trying to cover up for as an adult? Y'all aren't feeling exactly bold enough to share those things with me. Okay, that's all right. That's all right. That's all right. Maybe you're not feeling too empowered. Okay, we got one. Someone said, hold on, I'm still typing. It's like, okay. Being identified as gifted and talented as a child, which then eliminated the ability to be a beginner. They're putting a lot of pressure on you at a very, very young age. There's no room for you to make a mistake on this one because, well, maybe they're not gifted, right? And someone said in nursing school, yeah. Having to know all those answers. Uh-oh, now they're really coming, huh? Oh, being told that, oh, you mean you're going to local community college? Like, nothing's wrong with local community college. It's a whole lot cheaper. But it's like, why are you putting a cap on my abilities, right? How dare you? How dare those people to do that? Yeah, talk to professors and the whole expert identity. Yep. Conservative culture. Yep. English as a second language. That's a good one. That's a good one right there. I actually work with someone in my department right now who is hearing impaired. And I have to correct people all the time that assume that he doesn't know what's going on, that he's not sharp as a tack because he can't hear. No, he speaks a different language than what you do. Can you speak that language? Somebody made me mad and I did tell them that. Probably I should have addressed it in a different way. All right, I think I have like 10 minutes left maybe. So what the problem is with imposter thoughts is that it can really lead to a lot of procrastination. It can lead to a lot of missed opportunities in our life because we don't speak up for ourselves. We don't speak up for new opportunities. I look at it like this. I'm building this house. I'm not quite sure of what it's going to look like, but I know it's going to be grand. And what I need for that is I need new tools. I always need new tools in my tool belt so I can continue to build on this house, right? And if I'm thinking to myself, I don't know why they asked me that. Why do they keep asking me that? Blah, 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 blah. And I feel like I can't do it. So I don't reach for it and I don't go for it. I'm never going to build this thing. So I'm going to continue to miss out on opportunities. It's going to lead me to having a reduced ability to be able to be proud of myself, wasted time, wasted emotional energy, and not showing up fully for myself. And I remember this point when I was 35. I got so sick and tired of that. I got so sick and tired of me. And I decided to do something a bit more about that. So I'm going to skip over this one right here. How did it show up in your training? We don't speak up for ourselves. And then I talk more about how it showed up in my training. My son did these videos. You see how it's capturing me right there? He thinks he's so smart and funny, I tell you. So now let's kind of talk about what we're feeding ourselves, because those same scenarios back from undergrad, from elementary school, whatever, we're still feeding ourselves these when we have these moments of self-doubt, right? So what are we feeding ourselves and how can we feed ourselves something different? Because we're really feeding our future with our thoughts. So what we do instead is that we engage in a lot of negative self-talk. We remind ourselves of when we made, what we thought were bad decisions, or we made a mistake. It can really impact our sense of ego, limit our learning opportunities. I talked about that one before, because really how we talk to ourselves is important, because it's not who we are that holds us back, it's really who we think that we're not. So now let's kind of talk about confronting those imposter feelings, right? Now, another thing that my executive coach told me is that she was like, I can tell when you are frustrated or when you are anxious, because I grit my teeth. I grit my teeth, I flip my jaw like this, and I cross my arms. I'm almost like in a protective mode, whereas like I'm almost, expecting, some sort of impact or something like that. But when you're caught up in your anxiety like that, there's no way that you can really be flexible in your thought, right? So as my mom says, you got to be able to think your way out of a paper bag. So if I'm caught up in what I think is going on, as opposed to saying, okay, Ericka, this is what you're feeling right here. This is how we enact our plan to help us get from out of that wormhole that we're drilling down for ourselves in those moments where we're feeling really anxious. So she was like, plant your feet on the ground and try to breathe first. And then also, silence isn't golden. We don't have to go alone. Of course, we're supposed to be these experts, right? So they teach you that in grad school. They teach you that you're supposed to be able to solve your own problems and X, Y, and Z. Why? There are other people out there that know things. We should go and ask them. We should engage in our resources around us, because we are not islands. So we should not be keeping all of these things to ourselves. We should be reaching out, and we should normalize that reach out for our resources as well, because it's expected that we ask questions. Be your own best friend. We already kind of talked about that. Visualizing success. Everybody knows who Shaq is. Everybody knows Shaq can't hit a free throw if it was like, if he could touch it, right? But that's not what he tells himself every time he stood at that free throw line making millions of dollars, right? He said to himself, I'm going to hit this. And if he doesn't, he says, well, next time I'll do it, right? He doesn't talk crazy to himself. Oh, well, you knew you weren't going to be able to do that, right? He doesn't wake up in the middle of the night thinking about a free throw. Maybe. I don't think he did, right? Because he knew that there was going to be another shot, right? He was thinking, how can I make this happen? And we rarely think about that. When people ask us stuff, ask us to engage in new opportunities, we usually think, oh my God, why are they asking me that? As opposed to saying to ourselves, how can I make this happen? What resources should I be engaging, right? That's where we go down that rabbit hole, start grinding our teeth. So also we need to brush our shoulders off and reframe how we view mistakes, because really we need to detach the issues and criticisms from feelings about who we think other people think that we are. Nothing to do with each other. Cut out the Instagram and Snapchat mentality, because we compare ourselves to other people all the time, constantly, right? But what we tend to do is that we compare what we think are our blooper reels to what are their successes. But we have no idea what other people are going through, right? We have no idea that we're probably in the same position that they are, and that they learned how, or they're utilizing coping mechanisms to try to figure out how to keep moving forward. And we need to really do that same thing. Also doing something good for ourselves, like engaging in self-care or mentoring other people. Typically, we think, oh, well, self-care, oh, go get your nails done or whatever it is. I don't care what you have to do to support yourself, but it's important that we engage those mechanisms, those processes, that whatever it might be, to help us to feel more centered, feel more who we are, and ready and prepared for the next day, or to think that next big thought. But we typically don't do that. We won't talk too much about self-care, right? Because I've got like 2 minutes left. But how you engage in self-care and your ability to be able to engage in self-care is important for you to be able to take care of yourself, for you to support your next dream, for you to support your next goal, for you to support yourself through tenure, for you to support yourself through writing this grant, for you to support yourself through whatever it is that you're trying to do next. So I snatched this off of the interwebs, as my grandfather calls it. So it's a made-up self-care plan for you to kind of think about how you can support yourself in different domains: mind, body, spirit. Who are the people who can help you with that? And also outlining the things that you want to accomplish. They can be personal accomplishments, they can be professional accomplishments, they can be for whatever time frame you want to. But really, just think back and look back at this plan from time to time, so you can be reinforcing, okay, in this moment, I said that I was going to promise myself that I was going to get more exercise. That's on my list personally. I also promised myself that I was going to get more sleep. Those are things that are on my list, because I will stay up, I will stay on the computer, I will work, because now there's no separation between work and home anymore. So you work all the time. And when you're not working, you feel guilty about not working, right? So you're kind of like going down that rabbit hole all the time. How do we pull ourselves up from outside of that rabbit hole? I've spent a lot of time talking about us, about the individual person, right? But we didn't wake up one day and decide we're going to have these imposter thoughts or imposter fears, right? Somebody said something to us back in the day, and then those things were reinforced, sometimes on a daily basis for some of us, within our actual environments. Okay, so our work environments have to be responsible and have a responsibility to help promote safe and equitable environments where people don't feel like they have to be armored up in the armor of God every day in order to be able to go in there and deal with those people and do their work. So, right. So you need to be in environments where you're expected to thrive, where you have the resources and tools to be able to thrive instead of just surviving from one day to the next day, which is exhausting. Institutions that we're at need to ensure that environments are free from hostility, free from bullying, free from discrimination, free from microaggression. And this should be looked at as a matter of scientific integrity and scientific misconduct. Why is this looked at anything else? Sexual harassment is looked at like, oh my God, women shouldn't have to deal with that in their work environments. That is just awful, and we should hold people accountable. But when it comes to other types of harassment and bullying behavior, there's a blind eye that's turned because people don't want to deal with that in those spaces. It's a matter of scientific integrity. Why? Because it hampers our progress towards scientific innovation within our environments. It absolutely is. It's just like someone cheating, you harassing people in your laboratory, you having horrific behavior, and everybody knows about it. Why is that okay? Why is that acceptable? So there are things that leadership should be held accountable for. There are things that each of us can be held accountable for within our environments. But I think that when you're instituting something like this, where we're talking about safe environments, where we're talking about experiences like racism, discrimination, microaggression, we got to have some leadership buy-in with how our institutions are approaching it. Because if you don't have that, it's not going to be filtered down at all. No one's going to take it seriously, right? So leadership absolutely must ensure we have our safe, diverse, and inclusive academic environments. I repeated that twice on there and I didn't mean to. So they must have this unwavering support, right? They must communicate and demonstrate these values. They cannot be part of the problem. We all know people, when they're inauthentic and they're like, oh, well, we should have X, Y, and Z. And you're like, dude, I've been around you and I know that you're one of the main people who are perpetrators of this. So it's not believable, right? That any kind of important institutional change must come from the top. It absolutely must. Leadership must listen, and then they must act to normalize positive, more inclusive environments. Someone said in the chat that culture is not easy to change in academia. Diversity trainings does not equal culture change, which requires change at every single level, and you're absolutely right. How does leadership help to support this throughout different levels at their institution? They've got to educate their staff, they got to provide resources, and they got to provide safe spaces. This is not all though. So institutions should be hosting regular offerings of trainings and speaker series that are focused on different areas like implicit bias, bullying, discrimination, other harassing behaviors. It must empower staff engagement groups to help address these institutional issues as well. And it's got to create safe spaces for students, for faculty, for anyone, for staff, and a pathway to exit out of safe environments where need be, right? Half the time it's covered up. Nobody ever hears anything. A person is moved. The person who reports the stuff is usually moved someplace else, or they disappear and go off into the Netherlands, never to be heard from again. But the person who was the accuser, the person who's done this year after year, still remains in those spaces. Institutions have to reward and value more than just publications and grants. I understand what NIH calls currency. I get it. But even we're undergoing institutional change here too. So there are other things that are important besides how many grants do you have, how much money you're bringing in, what kind of publications, and are they high impact? Not, okay, I can have a publication, but it's not high impact enough, right? So there's that devaluing at every single stage, and we have to stop doing that. We have to stop communicating that some contributions are more important than others. Stop valuing certain kinds of research over others, and valuing community service accomplishments as actual weight. Tenure, promotion, so on and so forth, right? Challenging the status quo and taking action. There needs to be regular assessments of culture and environment and developing organizational strategic plans to address these areas. There needs to be sustained action. There needs to be transparency, accountability, sustainability, right? Institutions need to absolutely reinforce taking action against any individual that engage in bullying, discriminatory behavior, and other harassing behaviors. Publicly report issues of scientific integrity. Institute transparent reporting mechanisms as well. yeah, we know that we can report this, but how does the person do this? And then what comes out of it? The institutions need to stop turning a blind eye and holding people accountable. And I see there's a clock there. So we have roles as individuals, and I know before we get into it, the tax, right? But we can also be a part of our own change. So postdocs here at NIH have galvanized and banded together to form their own groups to kind of address feelings of imposter syndrome around here. As well, staff members at NIH, CDC, USAID have all banded together as well. I was a part of an effort at my own institution and was thinking to myself, girl, are you about to get yourself fired by speaking up? Right. It's hard to be the person who speaks up because you're always thinking that there's going to be some sort of reprisal. But if it doesn't start with us, then with who? Sometimes we have to create our own things. Sometimes we're the one who have to voice our opinion to leadership. Sometimes we have to galvanize with our friends, because if we're not a part of that change, will it occur? All right, I have gone over my time. That is it for me. Are there any questions in the chat?
Thank you so much, Dr. Boone, for your wonderful presentation. I'll have people post any questions through the Q&A function or through the chat, and you could respond to those yourself, Dr. Boone, directly to those individuals while we hear from our scientists. Would that be okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Perfect. Thanks. All right, so let's hear now from our RCMAR scientists. Let's start with Brandon. What are your thoughts on this presentation we've just heard from Dr. Boone?
That was obviously awesome. I think there's nothing that I could say to to add to that, and I totally kind of can relate to a lot of what was said, and I think that probably every person on this call is doing the same. I just had a quick story to share about salary, maybe related to imposter thoughts. So maybe I could just do that real quick in the 5 minutes
yes,
that I
please.
have.
Sorry.
Oh no, 5 minutes is all we had anyway. Don't worry. So like many people here, I have imposter thoughts, even though I've been a faculty for about 10 years, and to give you a sense of those thoughts, not long ago. I used to throw up before every lecture in front of students because I was afraid that my students would ask me a tough question, find out that I didn't know the answer, and then ask me the question, why are you teaching us? As someone trained in public health and teaching in school medicine, I think it's also enhanced a little bit for that reason. So this hasn't really gone away, but it's gotten a little bit easier for me to manage those thoughts over time. But of course, imposter thoughts are not limited to the classroom. It could also make an important impact on someone who may be negotiating for their first faculty position. And a few things for us as academics may be more important that impact our quality of life than one's starting salary. And for many families, the goal of education is to have more opportunities and to have a livable wage. And if you don't feel that you belong in academia, obviously negotiating anything can be hard, as having a job is a win. I definitely felt that way. I didn't plan to go to college. I wanted to be a personal trainer, but my mother forced me to apply, and she even helped me prepare my application. She finished high school, unlike my father, but thinking about college was still a new experience, as it is for, I'm sure, many people here. I eventually went to college and then to grad school, and it's worth noting that I failed the GRE verbal, but I'm glad that Hopkins took a chance on me, because in my mind, even still, they shouldn't have taken that chance after I failed my English test, even though I'm a native English speaker. But right as I finished my dissertation, I was set to start a postdoc. The postdoc did not pay lots, around $38,000, which was a big step up from a PhD stipend, big step. And I got creative and also did a concurrent postdoc at another school and got a higher salary, $73,000 combined at the time in 2010. That was good money. And I'll talk a lot about money today because I think it's not talked about enough. So I started my postdoc and immediately began applying for academic jobs. One campus was close to where I was living, and 9 months in, they offered me a position at $60,000 a year, which was great. It was less than what I was making as a joint postdoc, but the argument was that I was moving from a 12-month position to a 9-month position, so that meant less pay. And I was also told that give it a year, and we're going to increase your salary. And so I said yes with a handshake, with this verbal promise. But almost immediately after starting the job, I had a high administrative load, including being the undergraduate director with a program of 1,500 students, and I was teaching 8 courses. But I really appreciated the trust that was put in me to do all this work, because I didn't feel that I deserved that trust. So the fact that I was getting it, I was happy to do this work, to work nights, to work weekends. But over time, I did get burnt out, like much of us do, and much of us are right now. And I was also trying to do my research. I asked for a raise, 2 years later, based on the handshake that we talked about, which was supposed to happen in a year, because my salary was still the same. But the responses were not going to increase you. Go out and get an offer, and we could talk. And this was a surprise, since I was, I thought I was doing well. I was working hard. So I was a little bit crushed for some time, because I thought it's because I wasn't doing a good job. This is why this wasn't happening, and I should be happy to have a job. So I continued working and talked with some of my academic mentors, and also with my mother, who's my biggest supporter. And she actually said she's going to go talk some sense into my boss. She didn't, so this is probably a good thing, because there could have been issues there. I would fear for my boss. And asking for help often is sometimes something that we don't really know how to do. But I took a chance and did that with a mentor that I had, and tried to climb back up. And also I learned from them and others that my value at work is based on the value that other academics give me at my work. And this is how it seems to work in academia, at least for things like salary and even prestige. So eventually I applied for jobs again, which I felt was like starting over, especially in a time when pre-COVID, teaching 8 classes, traveling via plane to do interviews, and still I felt sick every time when I was out there in front of an audience trying to sell myself to them, saying why I belong there. I got a few offers. The highest offer was $92,000. This was awesome. I brought the offer back to my school, and surprisingly, they matched it. They just needed another university to tell me that I was valued, and then I was valued, and then they said, here, we're going to value you, we're going to pay you the same amount. But obviously, if this is the way it works in academia, at least in my experience, but being told to go out and get an offer is something that left a bad taste in my mouth. So I looked around again for real this time for jobs, and I applied to my current school, and I had a grant, so they offered me more money. They offered me $125,000, and this was crazy. So what might not catch your eye with this, verbal story is that in 2014, my salary was $60,000. In 1 year, by 2015, it doubled. And this is something that doesn't really happen, I think, in academia. It's kind of amazing, and also the impact of salary on quality of life, which is why I think we need to talk about, money more. Even though a lot of us are not here for the money, we kind of need the money to survive. And oftentimes we're not paid enough to survive. And the amount that I was getting now was, 5 times the salary that my mother was making. It's weird to revisit this number because, I'm sure everyone here feels the same, that we are not smarter. We are not harder workers than our parents. I'm not either of those for my mom. She works harder and teaches me still. I'm just privileged. And I try to pass this on a bit, urging my peers and students to take a chance in asking for money. Oftentimes the students that I have here in LSAMP are really surprised when I tell them that they can ask for additional scholarships or fellowships once they get accepted in the school, and before as they're applying to school. And it takes a lot to take that chance to send that email, make that call, and to make that ask. And oftentimes they will need feedback on their email, before they send it out, because they don't want to sound ungrateful in asking for, what they're worth. But anyway, I think we gotta pass this on, and when we go through these things ourselves, we definitely need to pass it on to the students that are going through it right now. But I think it's important, and especially what Dr. Boone said, that we can't let imposter thoughts stop us, from going out and getting what our research or efforts are worth, because many people, including ourselves, sometimes don't think that we're worth much in terms of money, but we are, and we should also remember that confidence doesn't necessarily mean competence, because I'm sure we all know a lot of people who are very confident, but not highly competent. So I think that's also important. So yeah, that's the short story I wanted to share, including money.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brown, for sharing that story. I do think that, talking about salary often feels taboo in our circles. And when we hear from others that, just go get an offer from another school. So if somebody offers you, then your school might match it. I mean, it's just such an insane way. And especially for first gen scholars of color, scholars that have no idea even what that means. Hearing the stories of how others did it and how they felt about it, I think is super important. So thank you so much for sharing that today. Dr. Diaz-Santos, let's hear from you. How have imposter thoughts affected you, and how do you manage these?
Thank you so much for the space, and thank you to Dr. Boone for an amazing presentation, and for my colleague, Dr. Brown, for showing vulnerability, which I think is not shown too often in these spaces. So thank you so much. So I do want to comment, the angle that I want to take is from a mental health perspective. I think that mental health is another topic that we don't talk often. My PhD is in clinical psychology. So I was trained with the CBT, IPT, ICT in the aspect of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So how this relates to imposter thoughts is that I can think about, as Dr. Boone mentioned, like I can think about those instances. I'm born and raised in Puerto Rico, and I have a thick accent. So in Puerto Rico, I remember these teachers be like, "You will never make it," right? But one difference is that I was with my family at that time, right? I'm the first one to leave my island, to leave my family, to leave my culture and my roots in order to pursue higher education. And I think that this is where I moved to the States in 2008, and I went to Boston University. I did not know what that meant back then, but I do know now. And I started hearing a lot of messages about you either don't belong or you need to assimilate. So the comments that I got was, "I didn't know you were that smart. You're too enthusiastic. You need to tone it down. You can be Puerto Rican after 5 p.m. You're too passionate. You're mean, aggressive, unprofessional, and deceitful. You're a wild and untamed horse. You will never make it, even after graduation. You need to be mindful of your stimulus value. You need to fix your hair. You need to dress professionally, and you need to speak better English." So you can, as Dr. Brown mentioned, and Dr. Boone, like education is my currency. I'm the first one in my family to have higher education, to attain higher education. And they were always threats to my education, left and right. So what do? You try to assimilate and assume an identity that is not yours. What did that did to me? It broke me down. It broke me down because I was enraged, but I was mostly hurt, because these comments didn't only came from my white colleagues. It came from women of color, people of color, in academia, right? And we can have a whole conversation about that. and what that means, because we're all part of the system. But for a young professional with no direction or blueprint, I felt lost, I felt betrayed. And in 2016, when I was doing my fellowship here at UCLA, I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, with depressive episodes, panic attacks every night. And that's when I felt, that's when I learned what passive suicidality means and feels like. Why am I sharing this? May is the Mental Health Awareness Month. And there's a lot of literature coming these days about the increased rates of depression, suicidality, and anxiety in medical school, grad school, early careers, and a lot of us, and the data is there, right? Like, we don't make it, right? We don't progress that often, we're not promoted, and the whole narrative is that we don't have what it takes, we don't fix it, like we don't fit in this environment, we don't belong, and then blame us for not having the strength to endure all the pain and the trauma that comes with it. So why am I speaking about this now? Is because I, as Dr. Boone mentioned, I have been in my own healing process for the past 3 years. Therapy, I went back to my spirituality, like the self-care, meditation, everything. And now I feel more grounded and more becoming more myself, where I can speak about these topics and these realities and this pain without the emotional component to it, right? Because I can speak about it and hopefully this will resonate with someone or some people, because my voice was taken away from me, like literally. And then as I continue to progress in my academic journey, I always get the message of, you don't fit, you don't belong, right? So I need to ground myself in what's my deepest fear. My deepest fear is losing myself for the sake of fitting in this academic culture, right? And I'm speaking because my voice is the only currency that I have. And I'm speaking on mental health because I know that I'm not the only one. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Diaz-Santos. Thank you both for your honesty and for sharing your experiences. I mean, I do think that I'll have Dr. Boone just respond really quickly in terms of how important it is to recognize these imposter thoughts, because the impact of that negative talk, the impact of the external environment on our experiences are real. They're real physically, they're real emotionally, and they're real financially. Right. And so we'll have Dr. Thorpe speak after you, Dr. Boone, but I'd like to give you a minute to respond because I know you have to leave our session a little bit early.
I do, and I'm sorry I have to leave early, but there's not anything else that I can add over what Dr. Santos just said. It is these thoughts, the pressure, I can't even begin to put it into words, the negative impact that this can have on your psyche, on you emotionally, on you psychologically, on your body, on your outlook, on your promotion potential, on what you do, the very thoughts that you have in your mind. And it's just destructive in every single way. And people don't recognize this, maybe because it might not be a part of their story. They may be the people who are the perpetrators of this. Maybe I should back the truck up a little bit here. Maybe that is part of what they're trying to do, right? I always say to my son, I say to my nieces, and I say to other people, other folks are afraid of your power. And like you said, Dr. Santos, your voice is your currency, your presence is your currency, your learning, your education, your experience is your currency. I always tell my kids, well, my nieces and my nephews and my own son, that this is the ultimate form of resistance. The ultimate form of resistance is showing them YOLO, as well, because my child is Black, so showing them your little Black self, being present, being smart, being fantastic as you always are. And then on top of that, you're nice, people love you, blah, blah, blah. And that's a threat, unfortunately, to some people. So they have to figure out a way to try to chip away at that. I don't stand for that. And like I was saying, earlier, we were like, should we voice our opinion? Should we stand up for this? Because I got a lot to lose at this point just by opening my mouth. Maybe I should just keep my head down and be quiet about it. But everything in me was like, no. Just like someone said in the chat, they lost out on an opportunity because they asked for more. They asked for their worth. We should not be afraid to ask for what we know we're worthy of, because other people are not afraid of that. They're expecting that they're going to get an affirmative response every single time, right? But when we get, those kinds of responses, like the person in the chat said, now I say thank you, because now I know what I'm up against and I can make decisions based on that. I had something like that happen to me as I was going from a postdoc into assistant professor opportunity at a very well-known university in the Northeast. And once they found out that I had a child, it was a whole different conversation. And at first I was so sad about that. And one of my mentors looked at me and she said, nope, this is a positive step for you, because now you know that you don't belong in that space. Why would I go there and fight against people who don't want me there? From the very beginning, they told me that, right? So as my nieces very well say, honey, I'm going where I'm celebrated and not tolerated nowadays. I'm going to be in places and spaces where they accept me and who I am, my braided hair, my afro, my earrings, whatever it is that I choose to be and do that day, because all of that is a part of me. And I'm looking for spaces and places and to be around people where I can be more of my authentic, intentional self. And I'm going to stop talking because Dr. Thorpe has to chime in now. And I'm sorry that I'm going to have to log off and go to another meeting. I so enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
So Ericka, before you leave, I'd like to say I really enjoyed your presentation, and I always enjoy. It's always a pleasure to hear you, and I always learn something from you in your presentations. If it's imposter syndrome or the loan repayment program, either way, I learned something each time. So I
have another workshop on self-care and burnout too.
I might need that one. So, but I know I want to be mindful of time. I know we had 15 minutes set aside for us to engage with one another. So I will be quick with my comments, because a lot of the things that I was going to say draw upon, Ericka's already brought them up from an environment standpoint. But I do want to highlight a couple things. In the environments which we operate, we're constrained. Our choices are constrained by our environments in which we operate, and we have to. Those environments have to change, and they have to change, like Ericka said, from top down. And the leadership and mentors, because sometimes mentors don't know what imposter syndrome is, right? So they don't understand what it is, or let me be real, they know what it is and just ignore it. That's one option. The other option is they don't know what it is, and I think in order to create an environment that's supportive, emotionally, mentally, and intellectually, I think we have to have trainings to make sure that the mentors understand the different cultures and the heterogeneity that comes in with having scientists of color and faculty of color in your department. I think that's so important, because unless we start doing that, we're still going to have the same old microaggressions that continue to fester up to the discrimination that then leads to the further perpetuate these imposter thoughts that we have that can lead to major health events if you let them stay, if you stay with them unattended. I think the other thing, what it's going to take though to change that environment is going to take some of the things that Ericka said before. It's certainly going to take banding together and coming together and having conversations. And we need resources. Don't just put a freaking statement up here saying that, oh, we're going to do this. We're going to come together. We support them. We need resources. We need a game plan. And one thing that we need, I think, in order to change that environment, we need some monitoring and accountability. Oftentimes people particularly say these things and do all these things, but there's no reporting system, or the reporting system, the people you report to are actually the perpetrators, and so you can't move any further than that, right? So I thought about this through the lens of these horrific sexual abuse acts that's been taking place in the United States military. The person they're reporting to usually are white men, and the perpetrators are usually white men. And so you see that in that instance, that much movement doesn't occur. So I think we need to make these changes. Not going to occur overnight. We have to stay the course, and then what we have to do is we have to also know that sometimes you may have to go get a sponsor or a senior mentor that could go with you to take on this conversation that you may be having with leadership, right? Because sometimes it gets pushed out of the way, or you do have these feelings. If I speak up, I may not get promoted. If I speak up, I might not get tenure, right? And that is an environment which has to change, because through all types of research that we do here, the research needs to be valued, and not only be valued, the environment needs to understand the research that we're doing. And it is high level research, and we need to move away. I think we need to move away. Also, when we're thinking about these environments, we certainly want to be able to have these spaces that are truly safe, not just say there's a safe space and it's really not safe. Because I've seen that before. Oh, we got these safe spaces. But I think we need to continue to make sure those spaces are really safe, and to be able to move forward. We need to do it at the leadership level, at all different levels, at the school level, the university level, and the department level. So I think you have to do a top down and a bottom up approach. And this is something that if we continue to chip away at it, I think we can get some traction and change the environment. I'll stop there because I know we wanted to open up and have at least 15 minutes, Lourdes, so that we can have some interaction and questions from the audience.
Thank you for your comments, Dr. Thorpe. I'd like to go ahead and allow folks from the audience, if you have any questions for our speakers today, that you can raise your hand. You can raise your hand through the Anna, remind me, I think you can raise your hand using the reactions button if you would like to speak, or you could go ahead and ask a question through the chat, and we'll have our panelists respond. So I'll give that a couple seconds to let folks queue up their questions. While we have those coming in, I guess I would ask the three of you about our scholars. This is a RCMAR webinar. Many of our RCMAR sites are new and have few scholars on their campuses. What would your recommendation be to other scientists, especially those on campuses where they might feel, isolated?
Well, I'll take a step. I would say that I'm hoping, but it's probably not the case, that our scientists are not feeling isolated. If they are, then we have created a space where they could come to us as leaders of the RCMAR to be able to deal with the issue of isolation. Also, another thing that come to mind is that I know that they have these RCMAR Scientists Advisory Board, and I'm not sure if there's a way to connect the scientists, or if the scientists across all of the centers have been connected. If they haven't, it may be a listserv or something. If they haven't, it may be an idea, a way to do that, because the scientists may feel more comfortable talking amongst themselves as opposed to leadership.
Thanks for that, Brandon.
Yeah, I would say that, I'm at the University of California, Riverside, and I don't know if there has been another RCMAR scholar from there. I think I was linked to the UCLA RCMAR program when I was a scholar, but in terms of feeling isolated and stuff like that, I mean, it's hard to feel that you are part of a group in pre-COVID times, at least, when you're the only one on a campus as part of a program. But ways to bring people together right now in COVID times, it seems like it's a little bit easier to feel connected through Zoom. Although, of course, you know, that has its limitations with the fatigue that I think everyone has with Zooming all day long from, you know, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. or more.
Thank you for that. There is a question in the chat about imposter syndrome ending. Does it end? Or is this something that we deal with? Is it for a long time? Is it a chronic syndrome? Or is it manageable?
I think it's manageable through some of the things that Ericka shared with us today. And I think it's us starting to just really affirm who we are and own who we are. We're talented, and we're talented, and the work we do is meaningful and valued. And I think we should move in that direction to start owning that and being thankful. And I think Ericka said it right before she got off the call, just being thankful of those things and not doubting them. It could be tough to do that, but I think if we start moving in that right direction, I think it's manageable. I don't know that it ever ends.
You know, thanks for that. One of the quotes that I always have in my mind is, you know, when a plant isn't thriving, you don't change the plant, you change its environment.
Right.
And, you know, I just wonder how that happens, right? How that happens for all of us. And, you know, where do we get the strength and the tools that we need to change those environments, right? There's a question in the chat about, you know, how do we convince leadership that we need to improve on making our departments more welcoming, right? How do we change the feelings and the spaces that we're in to have them be more welcoming? You know, so, and anyway, I don't know if there's any answers, but these are the questions that I certainly think about and was included in the chat.
Yeah. So how do we change leadership? So that's a very good question. I can share with you. I'm at the Bloomberg School of Public Health, and I can share with you what we're doing. We've had you know, ever since this COVID, you know, there's been this and this past year, racial and social injustice has been our sense of awareness has been heightened to the max, I believe. And we have put together a anti-racism action plan at our school, and all the school leadership and all the departments are moving. Are charged with moving forward to make it more welcoming and welcoming environments. Now, we're just starting out with that, and there seems to be a positive movement in that way. And the big key thing that, in my mind, at least for us, is that how do we monitor it, and what's the accountability if it doesn't work? So I think those are the big things. I think getting leadership to listen is one thing, but holding people accountable is a different thing. And I think that's the question I really want to know the answer to. How do we hold people accountable to make sure these spaces stay safe?
Thanks for that comment.
Can I?
Sure.
Can I ask? I just wanted to add in, because in terms of like convincing leadership, it's kind of like, it puts the onus on you to convince another person.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot of work when someone is already in a different mentality, and also highlighting and recognizing that the system is working as it's supposed to be working, right? When we're talking about structural racism or institutional racism in academia, or just reckoning with the reality that academic medicine, that research had a purpose of segregation in the caste system, the system continued to work perfectly for those that remain in power, right? So it's like convincing leadership is one thing. Changing the whole leadership, that's a different type of conversation. And putting, as Dr. Thorpe mentioned, putting the money, because when we're talking about equity, it's like Dr. Thorpe mentioned it, like, don't put a statement in your academic website, say like, we're all about equity and diversity and inclusion, And then you look at the leadership and they're like, oh yeah, they all look the same, right? So it's not going to move forward. And also acknowledging that this conversation is not new, right? If I talk to like one of our main, like first African-American women in our department of psychiatry, Dr. Gail Wyatt, she has been here for 46, 47 years, and she will let you know that these conversations are not new, and the move towards equity and justice and changing leadership is extremely slow. So it's like, I don't know how to convince leadership because that means that they need to release power and wealth. And we know capitalism. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah.
And there was a question, I think, in the chat for me. What are the consequences for not creating these? I think they asked what are the consequences for not doing so. I'm assuming they were talking about the not creating the safe space and diversifying. It goes back to what Dr. Santos just said. If we don't do that, we're going to still be in the same space, right? And we'll have a power dynamic and we'll have leadership that doesn't look like the faculty, nor does it look like the student body, and so which creates this mixed match, in my opinion. So I think the status of not doing it is we're going to have more of what we have now, more of the same.
Well, I'd like to bring our session to a close and thank you both. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for your honesty and your willingness to be brave enough to talk about things that we tend to not want to talk about, and certainly not talk about openly in our community. I hope this is the first of other conversations that we can have honestly amongst our RCMAR scientists and in our RCMAR community, and certainly with other scientists in other fields that might be joining us today that aren't necessarily part of our RCMAR family. So thank you again for joining us. We will be sending out a brief evaluation regarding this webinar, and we hope that you give us feedback on that. As always, we do have another webinar coming up scheduled in June. This one is focused on diversity supplements. You know, when we talk about supporting scientists and looking for funding and finding ways to connect with other mentors, perhaps at other institutions, you know, I see the opportunity of using diversity supplements as ways to bridge scientists to each other and to other communities. So we look forward to that presentation in June and hope that you all can join us. Again, thank you for sharing part of your day with us. We really appreciate your presence and all the work you do. And see you soon. Have a great day. Thank you, everyone.